Yes. I just want to say thank you. For those of you who have been faithful attenders of adult faith formation, we're so grateful. For those of you who maybe this is your first time, thank you for coming. The biggest thanks is for our chair of adult faith formation, Mary Jo Brooks. And, oh, did I get it? No. And our faith formation ministry committee, I don't know who's here or not, but they are dedicated and committed and tireless in the creative programming that they've done this year. So I just want to give thanks for adult education, adult faith formation, and all the work that this group has done. So I didn't want this moment to pass. This is our last session for this program year, but look for the details for maybe a book study this summer, some other things, okay? All right.
Thank you. Thank you. And is this your phone? Yes. And I'm going to stop this just for a second. We'll take it back to the beginning. So I also have to give big thanks to the Earth Care team, and 4 of the members are sitting here in the front row and are going to help lead small groups after we watch 2 videos. But they do tons of work behind the scenes, helping make sure that our church does things that are more sustainable. And then every year around Earth Day, they do some programming for adult ed. And so this is the really kind of the third part of that programming today. And so thank you, Brian and Maureen and Barbara and Karen, for being here to help lead the small groups. And I must give big credit to Erica Walker, who is the chairman of the committee and who arranged this whole programming. I'm just here reading what she's written and things like that, so big thanks to Erica Walker. Too often conversations about climate change focus on problems, on doom and gloom scenarios that leave us feeling overwhelmed and despairing. Today we're going to hear from a climate expert who's focusing instead on solutions. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson is a marine biologist, a policy expert, conservation strategist, and a professor at Bowdoin College. She's the author of a book, What If We Get It Right? Visions of Climate Futures, and she's co-editor of the national bestseller, All We Can Save, Truth, Courage, and Solutions for the Climate Crisis. We're going to first view a portion of a PBS interview with Ayana and then we'll watch a portion of a TED Talk where she outlines steps that we can take to find joy in climate action. And then after these 2 presentations, we'll have time for personal reflection in small group discussions. We have a couple places in the church so that we can hear each other talk in small groups, and that's where the Earth Care team will help lead that discussion. So if I actually can do this technology is not my strong suit. We'll play a little of the interview on PBS, and then I'll pause it and we'll go to the TED Talk.
Maybe a very hopeful look at how to not only confront the climate crisis that grips our world, but also how to flourish in the process. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, a leading marine biologist and climate policy expert, sat down with Hari Srinivasan to discuss her vision for a thriving, sustainable future. And she explains how a diverse set of experts in fields such as farming, finance, and fashion helped shape her ideas.
Christiane, thanks. Professor Ayana Johnson, thanks so much for joining us. First of all, the title of your book, What If We Get It Right? Visions of Climate Futures. I have read several books about kind of climate change and climate science, never really one with this particular kind of twist on it. Why did you want to approach all the conversations that you featured in this book with this particular bend or this thesis?
The title question really helps to frame or reframe the climate conversation around solutions. I think so often we're talking about the problem, or we're talking exclusively about technology and electricity, and we're not really thinking about all the solutions we have at our fingertips and the transformation that's required to our economy and society in order to accelerate implementation of all of those. So I really just wanted to say to people, we have the solutions we need, right? We know how to do clean energy and public transit and green our buildings, and shift our agriculture and protect and restore ecosystems, right? None of this is like a big mystery. It's just a matter of the speed and scale at which we're able to get those solutions happening out in the world. And as you mentioned, this book is in many ways an anthology that features interviews with 20 experts, colleagues who are friends of mine, who have helped me to answer this question and see the way forward in terms of visions of climate futures.
How do you kind of walk that line, I guess, between giving people some hope and maybe breaking them out of their existing narrative that, okay, well, this is well beyond our reach. The scale of this is so massive. I've seen these numbers. What can I do? Sort of that level of kind of hopelessness, to kind of making sure that it's not the other way or the other extreme. We're like, well, we can fix this if you just start recycling tomorrow.
Well, first I'll say if people feel overwhelmed by the climate crisis, that's actually a totally reasonable thing to feel. It's the biggest challenge humanity has ever faced, right? And we have really done a lot to throw our ecosystems, our atmosphere out of balance. So it is a lot to process. I can understand why people are anxious and worried or depressed about it. But we don't get to give up on the future of life on this planet, right? Who are we to give up on Earth, each other? We can't actually all go to Mars. So we have to make it work here. It's just a matter of really, I guess, a more accurate title for the book would be What If We Get It As Right As Possible? Because I feel like so often the conversation is as if it's binary, right? As if it's either apocalypse or paradise, when of course it's anything in between. And the difference between getting it 60% right and 80% right is huge in terms of our quality of life on this planet, the kinds of heat waves and storms and droughts and floods and fires and amount of sea level rise that we're going to have to deal with. So we're talking about, hundreds of millions of lives on the line if we veer much more on the apocalypse side than the paradise side. So I would just say to people who are feeling where do we even begin? Is it worth it? Yes. Those increments are so big that they matter, even if they seem small, like a tenth or a half of a degree of warming that we could collectively prevent would be a very big improvement. And for the people who are technology is just going to fix this, well, when, fusion energy would be really cool, but it's not here yet. So we do have to think about energy efficiency, and we do have to think about green buildings and insulation and public transit and all of these things that we can do. We have to think about composting and bike lanes and offshore wind energy and protecting and restoring ecosystems. We could just start on all of that now, essentially in some ways to buy us time until we have these other solutions.
You and your guests point out several different ways in the book how across party lines it is when it comes to the polling on whether or not people think climate change is real, whether they want to do something about it. And then there seems to be also a gap on whether they feel like they can do something about it.
Yeah. To be clear, there is a huge division in this country politically between the Democrats and Republicans on climate. I don't want to sugarcoat that, right? We have one party who many people deny it exists, and another party passing sweeping legislation to advance solutions. And the constituents, when you poll, there is definitely a difference between Republicans and Democrats. But interestingly, still the majority of people would like our government to do more to protect clean air and clean water, right? So we don't actually have to spend all of our time arguing about the details of climate change or even the origins of it. We can just agree to get to work on the solutions. People in Ohio and Texas are very excited that their states have the biggest amount of wind energy. Those are good jobs, right? It's not just for hippies. It's a really financially viable market. Renewable energy, right? And for young people, there's a ton of concern across party lines, but much more than others might expect for young Republicans who are you're setting our planet on fire. can you please stop, right? So there's this generational shift happening, which I think is really promising. And there's also very, very significant differences across race in the country. It's something like 47% of white Americans are concerned about climate change compared to 65% of Black and Asian Americans and 70% of Latinos. So when we think about the typical environmentalist, we probably are thinking of a notion that's not actually borne out by the demographics and the polling. And if we want to successfully build the biggest, strongest team to address the climate crisis, we need to think about welcoming everyone in who's concerned and helping everyone find their role.
So when you start talking about race and demographics and how people of color are interested in solving this, how did you get interested in science? How did you get interested in specifically in the climate as you were growing up? Because most likely the climate science role models did not look like you.
Well, first, I think it's important to say on that issue of like the racial differences that it's not because people of color are more impacted by the effects of climate change, although that is true. There is a grave injustice to the climate crisis that the people who did the least to cause it in terms of emissions are bearing the greatest brunt of the impacts. It is, in fact, because people of color tend to have a more communal worldview as opposed to individualist, right? This sense that we're all in it together and like we better figure out how to collectively address this crisis. So I would just encourage us all to embrace more of that collective wisdom, collective action as the solution, as opposed to just making sure we or as individuals get through this moment okay. And that, sort of reflects on my career, as you asked. I mean, I fell in love with the ocean at a young age, as many people do, and then realized it was threatened and was like, well, how do we save coral reefs? How do we protect coastal communities that depend on the ocean for their economies, their livelihoods, their cultures, right? My dad's from Jamaica. So many people who live, especially in the tropics, are very heavily dependent on the ocean for food security, et cetera, their economies. So I always, when you love something, you want to help protect it. So I encourage all of us to think about how to harness that love of nature as part of our inspiration. But then, I quickly learned that it's not just about snorkeling with colorful fish. It is this question of policy, economics, politics, sort of sociology, anthropology, even like behavioral psychology, that you have to fit all these pieces together to think about solutions that would actually be practical. And so my work has evolved to, I co-lead an ocean policy think tank because I think we need to change the policy frameworks for our coastal cities. So Urban Ocean Lab is making recommendations for how to address a lot of these climate impacts in the place where 1 in 5 Americans live, which is our coastal cities.
I mean, what you do really well and your guests do really well is talk about how kind of climate change is exacerbated by lots of other things that we don't connect on a daily basis, right? I mean, fast fashion, for example, is an incredibly massive industry. And, people are constantly looking for low prices, walking into some of these stores for practically disposable clothing. But there are these other much more significant costs with this entire infrastructure.
Yeah, I was just flipping to the page in the book. Each section opens with a list of 10 problems and 10 possibilities. I think it's important to always put those two side by side. And the one on fashion is that Americans dispose of about 13 million tons of clothing and footwear each year, of which only 13% is recycled. The average fast fashion garment is worn only 7 times before it's discarded. And overall, the fashion industry is responsible for about 10% of global carbon emissions and 20% of industrial water pollution, and that is rising. So as much as, it's an inconvenient truth, to borrow a phrase from Al Gore, a movie title I did not appreciate truly until writing this book, we're going to have to change some of the ways that we live on this planet. Earth cannot support this level of consumerism and disposability based on fossil fuels.
Something that caught my kind of eye a few times in this read was there's almost like these sort of war of narratives, and people who have a lot of resources can try to push the blame onto the individual, maybe away from governments or corporation.
Yeah. The follow the money section, one of the statistics that backs that up in detail is that the richest 10% of the population owns 76% of the wealth, takes 52% of the income, and accounts for 48% of global carbon emissions. That's the richest 10% accounting for 48% of emissions. And the poorest 50% of the world gets only 8.5% of the income and accounts for 12% of the emissions. And so that's the kind of discrepancy that we're talking about here. And there's a similar challenge with what the banks are doing. The top US banks since in the last decade, so we're talking about JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, have provided about $1.5 trillion to fossil fuel companies to help them expand their operations, right? So in a moment where we need to be investing in the transition to clean energy as quickly as possible, we're seeing massive investments still in building out new fossil fuel infrastructure, which is totally ridiculous. And probably one of the most important things you can do at a household level is move where you have your money. So if you have your money in one of those banks, you're probably financing the fossil fuel industry to some degree. And there's been research that shows by Bank Forward and others that if you have $125,000 saved up for retirement, and that money is not in a climate-friendly fund, that money being loaned out to fund fossil fuel stuff is doing more harm than all the good you could possibly do to balance it out in terms of just eating plants, only walking and riding your bike, etc. So if people are looking for a specific thing they can do, it's kind of a pain in the butt to spend a day researching it and filling out the forms to move your money, but that can make a big difference. Green energy companies are making a bunch of profit. They're growing really quickly. So that's something I hope people would look into.
There's a quote in your book from Angela Davis. It says, "You have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world, and you have to do it all the time." So how do people balance kind of that sense of urgency, especially when climate as a problem seems so daunting?
And it's something that we have to deal with for the rest of our lives, right? It's not like we can all work really hard for a month and then it's over. And so what I encourage people to do is really think about how they specifically can be useful. So I propose this framework of a climate action Venn diagram with 3 circles. And the first one is, what are you good at? What are the skills, the resources, the networks that you specifically can bring to the table? The second circle is what work needs doing, right? There are hundreds of climate and justice solutions. So pick one or a few that you want to contribute your skills to. And then the third circle is what brings you joy or satisfaction, gratification, right? This sense that you're energized to keep doing this because this is something that we're just going to have to keep chipping away at and making better and leaning into this sense of possibility and creation for as long as we can possibly be around to contribute. And being at the heart of this kind of Venn diagram, I think is where everyone needs to find their way to. And of course, Hari, what you would do and what I would do should be different because we're bringing different things to the table. So I would encourage people to look beyond what they would think about in their personal life, right? Like, don't just think about your own carbon footprint and your own money and your own family. Think about what you can contribute within your professional life. How can you help the corporation you work for or help to lead become something that's contributing to climate solutions instead of a problem, right? How can you help your community, your city, your town start to make these shifts? And I think there's just so much opportunity there for us to each roll up our sleeves and find ways to be useful. That's the word I keep coming back to, is like, we just all need to find ways to be useful.
I feel like it spoke to me on so many levels. And just a quick aside before we go to the TED Talk, I know for a fact from the work I've been doing at the NWF, is people do make a difference. We work with other partner groups on trying to stop oil and gas development in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And so many people have spoken out about that. Big insurance companies don't want to, they've said, we're not going to insure oil companies if they want to develop there. And then now some big energy companies say, we're not going to develop there, and it's because of public pressure. So it does make a difference. I'm hoping I might need Brian Murphy up here to help me with a little tech issue. I, of course, have to pick the youngest person in the room to help me with tech stuff. How do I hit escape. How do I make it smaller so I can get to the second video?
Let's see here.
I've got to ask, how do you...
That's not it, right?
Nope. Of course, I practiced this a million times at home, but it'll be a completely...
There it is.
So I want to go to the... Oh.
I was just wondering.
To make it smaller? Yeah, the 2 arrows. But I think that'll make it... Yeah.
Yeah, we're just trying to make this go away.
Oh, there, I think that, thank you. You did it. Thank you. Here is a TED Talk. It's a little bit shorter, and this is also just fantastic. I'm going to just close this up so it doesn't start playing by accident.
What they can do to help address the climate crisis. But what they usually mean is, what's one quick, easy, simple thing they can do? Well, that particular ship has sailed. The climate challenge is gargantuan, thanks largely to fossil fuel executives and the PR firms and politicians doing their bidding. We need to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions from electricity, transportation, agriculture, industry, and buildings. We need to protect and restore ecosystems. We need to change society, policy, economy, and culture. This is about transformation, and the stakes for humanity are greater than my heart and mind can fully fathom. So I find the best way to cope with this is to avoid dwelling on the terrifying scientific projections and instead pivot quickly to solutions. Now, the climate movement and the media all too often ask each of us to do the same things, to vote, protest, donate, spread the word, lower our carbon footprint. That term, by the way, carbon footprint, was popularized by fossil fuel corporations in an attempt to put the blame on us as individuals. But yes, it is good to do those things. I do those things. However, all too rarely are we asked to contribute our special talents, our superpowers to climate solutions. And what a failing, for that would actually enable the radical changes we need. So, where do we each begin? Here's my best answer. A Venn diagram. The first circle is, what are you good at? What are your areas of expertise? What can you bring to the table? Think about your skills, resources, and networks. The second circle is, what is the work that needs doing? Are there particular climate and justice solutions that you're keen on? Think about systems level changes, things that can replicate or scale, things like composting initiatives, insulating buildings, restoring wetlands, getting climate candidates elected, and electrifying everything. There are heaps of options. The third circle is, what brings you joy or satisfaction? There is so much work to be done. Please do not choose something that makes you miserable. This is the long haul, so it's critical to avoid burnout. Choose things that enliven you. The goal is to be at the heart of this Venn diagram for as many minutes of your life as you can. If you're familiar with the Japanese concept of ikigai for finding your purpose, you can consider this a simplified, climate-focused version of that. Taking this approach will enable way more progress on climate solutions than if we each obsess about our individual footprints. For example, 9 months after being inspired when I took him to his first climate protest, Boris Kentov, a financial tech executive, launched a climate impact investing fund. And honestly, I don't care if Boris never goes to another protest again. Sarah Stillman, a journalist who covers systemic injustices in immigration and workers' rights, has started including a deep and nuanced climate context for these issues in her reporting. And my own mother, a retired English teacher, became a small but mighty part of getting fracking banned in New York State, and is now mothering chickens and converting her lawn into a model for small-scale regenerative farming. I call these climate action Venn diagrams, and having now seen many of them, endearing crayon versions by children, delightfully detailed versions by adults, this is one of my favorites. I have a few additional parameters to offer before you draw your own. This does not necessarily mean you should quit your job or go start a nonprofit. Quite possibly, you are most powerful in your existing roles where you already have specialized knowledge and robust networks. So how might you lean into those talents? Can you help your town, company, church, or school charge ahead with climate solutions? Because what we need is change in every sector and in every community. And be gentle with yourself on the "what are you good at" question. Set your insecurities aside and simply consider what you have to offer. Over the last year, since I've been sharing this concept, lots of people have been drawing their own and posting them on Instagram. It's been super exciting to see what people have been coming up with. But I've noticed that a lot of them are landing on some version of communicate about climate. Now, I fully appreciate the irony, given that I am standing here talking to you about climate, but we can't all just talk about it. We need doers. We need mutual aid organizers and city council members. We need green building retrofitters and wind turbine installers and bike lane planners. We need culture shapers and policy nerds. We need employees pushing their corporate employers to change. Here's where I will offer what I consider to be the sexiest word in the English language: implementation. Because we already have most of the solutions we need. We need to get to work and to pick up the pace. We need to build the biggest, strongest team possible to tackle this most enormous challenge humanity has ever faced. Another word I love that is perfect for this moment is leaderful. I learned this term from Black Lives Matter activists who use it as an organizing principle. Social movements can be fragile when they're helmed by a few prominent leaders. We need many leaders to accelerate this transformation from a fossil-fueled economy to a regenerative one. Maybe you are one of those leaders, or maybe you don't want to be out front. That is more than okay. This is not about being a hero or an influencer. This is about being useful and advancing solutions. Contribute to an existing effort, make it possible, build the website, raise the funds, plan the events, recruit the talent. The question should not merely be, what can I do to help address the climate crisis, but what can we do together? Join something. And if you need a bit of inspiration, here is a list of some climate solutions to consider. So what will you do? Or how will you step it up? Actually draw this out. What are you good at? What is the work that needs doing? And what brings you joy? Also, try to avoid diagramming your way to what you're already doing. Think about this expansively. Start with a blank slate and consider how you can make your best impact. Remember, this is about action. I've emphasized the importance of everyone contributing to climate solutions. So before I close, I want to mention one of the major barriers to participation: inequality. Perhaps you know that around the world, it's people of color who are most heavily impacted by the effects of climate change, whether that's air pollution, hurricanes, droughts, or floods. But you may not know that it is also people of color who are most concerned about climate and most likely to want to be a part of the solutions. In the US, where we have robust data on this, 49% of white Americans are concerned about climate, compared to 57% of Black Americans and 69% of Latinx Americans. Imagine the huge and additional contributions these folks could make if unburdened from the dangerous distraction that is racism. And goodness, do we need all of that ingenuity and leadership. In other words, help us help you. Help us all save the planet. My last challenge to you then, since all our fates are intertwined, is in addition to leveraging your talents, can you help others in using theirs? And let's work to demolish the societal barriers that prevent people from fully devoting themselves to climate solutions. This is what I know. There are innumerable possible futures. I know we each get some say in which future we'll collectively have and a chance to help build it. I know that every 10th of a degree of warming we prevent, every centimeter of sea level rise we avoid, every bit of nature we protect and restore matters. I know that our actions add up. This is an invitation. Find your role if you haven't already. Encourage others to find theirs. Averting climate catastrophe. This is the work of our lifetimes. Thank you.
So we are going to break into groups. We were originally going to break into 4 groups, but I think we'll just do 3 since it's a smaller number. So Maureen and Barbara, if you want to lead a group here, that would be great. And then we'll take some folks down to Fellowship Hall. If you're watching this online, I hope that you will recreate those Venn diagrams and fill it out so that you can think more deeply about how you can be involved. And for all of us who are getting into small groups, we have the Venn diagrams for you to fill out and pens to do so. So thank you very much. I'll kind of come down and help divide folks up and lead folks to Fellowship Hall.